Welcome to Pub Natter, where we record each episode in a different pub in Rutland, the smallest county in England. In each episode, your hosts, Tim and Justin, give a voice to the landlords and landladies and a special guest with a specific area of interest or expertise. We hope you enjoy our chats, and it encourages you to go and explore our little county and all it has to offer. Like the motto says, there is much in little.
When rain stops play, it's time for some pub natter.
As you know, tonight's podcast is from the Whipper Inn in the Market Square. Although, as you will hear, this particular hostelry is starting its journey back towards its origins, when it was a 17th century coaching inn known as the George. Now, I haven't been able to find out very much about the history of the pub. So what I've done is I've decided I'm going to do what royal correspondents do when they're standing outside a hospital waiting for a baby or news of an operation. And they just stand there and make stuff up. Because they don't know anything more than you or I do they? But they stand there and they very seriously and very earnestly tell you what might be happening, what people might be doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what people might have been doing. So I wasn't able to find out very much about the pub itself, but I have found a bit about the geography of the town and the market square around it. And so I'm going to speculate as to what some of the people in the pub might have been doing back in the 17 and 1800s. Across the market square from the pub is Oakham Castle. Now this has actually served as a court of law since at least the 13th century, possibly longer, and it still operates as a court every 2 years. They have the Crown Court here, and people are tried and sentenced for real-life current crimes. Back in the 1700s, if you were enjoying a pint outside the George, you would have had a pretty good chance of seeing some petty criminals marched across the square after sentencing towards the old jail on Jail Street. If they weren't going to jail, and they were fortunate not to be going to jail, they might have gone straight to the stocks, which you see by the old the buttercross there. And if you were here having a pint, you could put your pint down and wander across and entertain yourself by throwing things at them. Interestingly, there were stipulations as to what you could throw at people in the stocks.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that dependent on the conviction?
Yes, it was. And some people, it was stipulated that you could only throw soft things so that they would be humiliated and smelly, but not particularly harmed.
A minor crime.
Yeah. If you were a more serious miscreant, then they were allowed to throw stones or heavy vegetables like potatoes or turnips at you, which could actually cause quite serious injuries. So being put in the stocks was not necessarily the easiest thing.
Hopefully not a Swede. I bet that can do some damage.
A lot of damage. So the stocks in Oakham are unusual in that they've got 5 holes. Most stocks have 4, so that you could put 2 people in them, 2 legs each. Mm-hmm. There are a number of theories as to why the Oakham stocks have 5 holes instead of the usual 4. One is that they're a Roman design, which was actually an instrument of torture because the 5 holes were for 2 feet, 2 hands, and a head. Nice. And you would be left in that position, which I would imagine would be excruciating after about 15 seconds. So most people don't think that that's what the Oakham one's for. They think that it was the 2 pairs for 2 men and a single one that you could put both feet of either a woman or a child who was smaller into if you needed the extra space.
You put a child in the stocks?
Absolutely.
No way.
It taught them a lesson. Yes. Harsh but fair. Anyway, from time to time, and a lot less often than you might imagine, you might witness the final journey of a more serious criminal. Interestingly, there were only 7 hangings recorded in Oakham in the 18th century over a period of about 35 years, which
Yeah, I should imagine that's quite low.
we all
Compared to other
imagine
places.
you could get hung for stealing a loaf of bread or whatever. So either there weren't many people, or the people of Oakham were particularly well behaved. But hanging in Oakham was not as common as you might imagine. I just want to take you back to a Tuesday on the 27th of March in 1789. And had you been in the George having a beer, you might have had some special entertainment that day, because the Weldon brothers were executed. They had killed a local baker from Edith Weston, and one of them then, between killing the baker and being convicted, they admitted at their trial, bearing in mind no DNA, no CCTV, that they had planned to rob and murder 5 more people. Why they confessed that is beyond me.
I just think they might have been beaten out of them.
But they were taken off to the little jail in Jail Street, and not happy with having killed a baker and planned to kill 5 other people, they killed the jailer whilst attempting to escape. They were recaptured, and on this particular Tuesday morning, they met their end. So if you'd been here in the George, you would have been outside with your flagon of ale, and you would have seen them being brought from the jail on Jail Street, just 150 yards up the road, through the high street. They'd have passed the pub and the baying mob, and the baying mob would probably have fallen in behind them, and as they walked down the high street and past what is now Rutland Sports and the council offices, the Wisteria, and across what's known as the Swooning Bridge towards the place of execution. The little humpback bridge that you barely know that you've gone over as you leave Oakham, head towards Uppingham, well, that's called the Swooning Bridge, and it's called the Swooning Bridge because it was the last place that the relatives of the condemned would see their loved ones before they met their end, and they were known to pass out from grief and fear and the rest of it. And there's as Whitwell has a parallel with Paris, so Oakham has a parallel with none other than Venice, because the Bridge of Sighs in Venice is also named for the same reason. It was the sighs and the tears and the wails of the loved ones of the condemned as they walked across that tiny bridge. It was the last time that they would see them alive. So having crossed the Swooning Bridge, it was a short walk then to the ironically named place of execution called Mount Pleasant.
You're having a laugh.
I am not. The gallows were on Mount Pleasant. It may have been ironically named, who knows? But
so where is this in modern day times?
It's as you walk out of Oakham, you go over the little humpback bridge, and then you go up a short, steepish hill. There are 3 or 4 houses and cottages on the left, and then you come to an open field. It's somewhere around there.
All right.
It's quite a high point, and from there, the condemned could actually see across, because there was no Rutland water in those days, and they could see across to Hambleton. Yes, so these particular chaps are taken off to Mount Pleasant, where they met their end, and that was the last hanging at Mount Pleasant in Oakham. Once you'd seen the entertainment, the bodies were taken off actually to Hambleton on this occasion and hung on a gibbet until they rotted.
Nice.
But you would be able to pick up your flagon of ale and wander back to the George and get a refill and carry on with your day.
More entertainment.
And after that, the next hanging in Oakham was not until about 1813, and that took place from the new jail using a new gallows, but that's another story for another day.
When rain stops play, it's time for some pub natter.
And our special guest is Councillor Andrew Brown, JP, who is Chairman of Rutland County Council. We're just going to begin by just asking you if you can tell us about your early years, so where you were born and where you were brought up.
So I'm Rutland born and bred.
Hey.
So
That's quite rare around here.
but as we're farmers, farmers don't tend to move very far. I mean, my father married a girl from the next door village. I managed to widen the gene pool a little bit by marrying someone from Stoke-on-Trent. So that was a little bit further away. So I
You went to school
live
here?
in Caldecott, went to school in Caldecott when there was a primary school in every village, virtually in Rutland. Then I went to Oakham School here in Oakham, and then went on to Nottingham University and did a degree in engineering.
Oh, wow.
So nothing to do with farming, really.
So what was your thinking there?
Well, with the A-levels I did, which were maths, physics and chemistry, that
Right,
sort of fitted in quite well with engineering. But I sort of quite quickly decided that engineering wasn't really for me. It was another 3 years of maths and physics, really, which perhaps wasn't the best choice.
Engineering is quite a wide term. Was it? What sort of engineering?
It was mechanical engineering.
Right.
So
Process plants, that type of thing.
that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of nuclear power stations, believe it or not, gas turbines, that sort of thing. All really useful skills to have on a farm, as you might imagine. So, yeah, from then I did a little stint back on the farm. Then I went off to Australia for a while. Went around Australia and New Zealand.
What, just travelling?
Yep. Ended up staying in Darwin for 6 months.
Hot. And
Very, very
humid.
hot, yeah. So I ended up working there in a, what we would call an off-licence, what they would call bottle shop, which is selling alcohol, basically. And at that time, Darwin was 40% Aboriginal. And it still does have a high population of Aborigines. I went back there 4 years ago, almost exactly this time 4 years ago. And it's very much a frontier town. I mean, the nearest big place to Darwin is Jakarta. It's not even on the same continent.
Wow.
That is how remote it is.
Wow.
And when I was back in 1988, there was, believe it or not, there was no fresh milk. You could not, because it's so remote, you could not get, all the milk was powdered and reconstituted. So that's how remote it is. I mean, it's hard to fathom in a small country like ours,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's just mind-bogglingly far from anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's quite small. I mean, do you think of, it's a state capital, essentially.
Yeah.
But probably not a great deal bigger than Corby, Kettering, something like that.
So how long did you stay out there for?
So about 12 months in total. But 6 months of that was in Darwin, where, as you say, it is very, very hot and very, very humid.
Yeah. So then you came back to UK.
I did, yeah, and then I went back on the farm. I was quite heavily involved with Rutland life. I became the chairman of the Rutland Squash Club. I played rugby for Oakham Rugby Club for many years. I used to organise a thing in Upham, an annual farmers' ball, which took place in Upham School Memorial Hall. So that was quite a big annual event in Upham. I don't think it exists anymore.
So was this your dad's farm?
Yeah, and well, it's been in the family for quite a long time. Our family's been farming probably for 300 years.
But whereabouts is the farm?
So we've Caldecott, and we've got a farm at Liddington as well. It's mainly tenanted, so we only own quite a small bit of land. We own about 100 acres.
And what sort of farming is it?
So historically, it was I used to farm European subsidies. That unfortunately has come crashing down around my ears now. But mainly arable. So
He voted for Brexit. I didn't.
really, that's economic suicide, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. there are no benefits. So I've yet to see a single one. But anyway, we're
17.5 million people can't be wrong.
Yes, of course they can. When they lied to us, just the emperor's new clothes. That's all it was. So yes, back to the topic. What were we talking about? My farm. Yes.
Yeah.
So 60% arable, 40% permanent pasture, 620 acres. For those people who aren't farmers, it's quite difficult to envisage what size that is. There's 640 acres in a square mile. So if we pushed all our fields into a square shape, it would be nearly a square mile. But as I say, we only own quite a small part of that. So it's mainly growing arable crops, and we're right in the bottom of the Welland Valley, so that floods on a regular basis. A couple of weeks ago, a third of the farm was underwater. So that's only really good for growing rough grass. Historically, we had a lot of sheep and cattle. I don't have any of either anymore. I'm too old for livestock and all the hassle and stress that goes along with those. So now someone else puts their sheep on my land and pays me for the privilege. But bizarrely, since we've left the European Union and we've lost the support payments from the EU, I've now been forced to go into these new government environmental schemes. I don't have a choice because there's no way I could make up that lost income from the EU by any agricultural activity. So now, half my farm is out of production because the government's paying me not to grow anything on it. It's an absolute madness, utter madness. The whole environmental farm and food policy is absolutely crazy. Because, of course, that lost production has got to be made up somewhere. And if you're importing it from somewhere where they're knocking the rainforest down to grow it, I mean, environmentally, you've shot yourself in the head, not the foot. Because it's all very well for the birds and the bees here in Rutland. But if all you've done is export your environmental problems somewhere else, it's utter madness.
But we do that with a lot of the green policies, don't we? A lot of the recycling doesn't actually get recycled. It gets put on a ship and sent to China.
Yeah, but with food, I mean, food is vital to this. I mean, you can't live without food.
Sure. Well, I think we already import 2/3 of our food.
Well,
into the UK.
we're less than 60% self-sufficient in the stuff we can grow ourselves. And now we're completely undermining that even more by taking all this land out of production, which to me seems crazy. But I'm a businessman. I mean, I'm not the moral custodian of food production in this country. That's the government's job.
Sure, yeah.
If I can see a better margin in growing stuff for the birds and the bees, well, that's what I'm going to do.
You are obviously quite keen on conservation as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm a chartered environmentalist, so I do know quite a lot about conservation and how it all works and stuff. And we've won awards on the farm.
So what sort of things do you do?
We take the areas out of production that are too wet for growing stuff, or the soil's not very good, that sort of thing, to encourage things like grey. I saw the covey of grey partridges this morning, and grey partridges are quite rare. I mean, there's a lot of French partridges around, but not many grey partridges, which are the indigenous ones. We've got masses of brown hares, and we did a barn owl breeding programme by putting a lot of barn owl boxes up. We've put about 20 barn owl boxes up. We've put 40-odd smaller, medium-sized bird boxes for things like little owls, kestrels, that sort of thing. And we've put 80-odd smaller bird boxes for things like hedge sparrows, things like that. So hopefully the birds will go in and then breed. But of course, a lot of it's down to the weather. Because last year, the Hawk and Owl Trust came to check the boxes, and there wasn't any evidence of any owls breeding at all.
Something else that was really interesting that I read about you is you're a freeman of the City of London.
I am, yes.
So how did you get that award, and what does that actually mean?
Well, you have to be a member of one of the London livery companies, and the livery companies are really ancient. Basically trade unions, which allowed you to be able to sell your produce in the City of London. And the oldest one, the oldest livery company, I think, is the Mercer's livery company, which would be started in the 11th, 12th century.
Wow.
Something like that. The Farmers' Livery Company started in 1952, so that is quite a new one. But there's masses of history which attracted me to becoming a member of the livery company. And after a while, you have to pay various fines, and it's very archaic and historic. You have to pay various fines, and then eventually you become a freeman of the city. And there are various privileges that go along with being a freeman of the City of London. The most obvious one that everyone knows about is that you can take your sheep across London Bridge, which I did.
Did you?
Yeah, when I was the sheriff. Yeah, so I did that. One of the other great privileges.
All of them, or just one?
No, it wasn't very many.
A token
It was
one.
a few. And it's quite a busy road, that, and they had to cordon off a section. It's all quite highly regulated.
Yeah, I had a vision in my mind. Like 200 sheep and a border
No,
collie.
no. I think it was about 6, and I think they had to have 2 different, because it was a charity event that is run every year, and the sheep have to have a rest as well at either end and that sort of thing. So it's highly organised.
So is it several people walking the same sheep back and forth?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So
And of course you have to pay for the privilege.
professional sheep.
They are, yeah, definitely. So that's one privilege. So one of the other privileges that I think you're allowed to urinate in the street within the city without getting into trouble. The other one, or one of the other ones, is that if a constable finds you drunk within the square mile or the City of London, he's meant to put you in a hackney carriage and send you on your way. And by far and away the best privilege of being a freeman of the city is that if you get convicted of a capital offence, you're allowed to insist on a silk noose rather than a rope one, so it doesn't burn your neck as you're swinging backwards and forward. Really, really useful privilege. I'm sure you'll agree.
Where do I sign up?
Absolutely.
But you do get access
Sure,
to
yeah.
some of the most fantastic historic parts of London, which you can't normally go into. We had our annual banquet a couple of weeks ago, and that was in Draper's Hall, which is very, very ornate. And believe it or not, I sing a song at that event. So,
Wow.
so
Is that on YouTube somewhere?
no, I don't think it is actually. I've got some pictures I could send you of
No,
me
we
singing.
We want sounds. Not much good for a podcast.
No, it isn't really, is it? No, that's true. Shall I do a rendition?
No.
Give me a few more pints.
You can just tell us what you sang. if you
Well,
want.
it's called "To Be a Farmer's Boy." It's a quite an old folk song, I think. It's about a young lad who goes to a farmhouse and asks for work and ends up marrying the daughter and inherits the farm. But that's all done through the medium of song.
Fantastic. If you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a comment in your preferred app. If you have suggestions for Rutland pubs or local guests that you would like to see featured, please get in touch. So the other really interesting thing is that you are in the Worshipful Company of Farmers.
Yes, well, that is the livery company, yeah.
So that is
the livery company, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that is the Farmers Livery Company. And
So that started in 1950s.
in 1952 that started, so that's a relatively new one. And bizarrely, you know when we say things are a bit confused and they're all at 6s and 7s, well, that comes from the livery companies. Because I think the great 12 livery companies have a hierarchy, the Mercers being number 1, and then the 12 oldest ones are then sort of listed in order of when they were founded. And number 6 and 7, and I can't remember which they are, but they were founded about the same time. So they had a big argument about who should be number 6 and who should be number 7. And obviously that didn't go down very well with the hierarchy because it was conflict and stuff. So in order to get round this potential row they were having, every year they swap. So number 6 becomes number 7, and number 7 becomes number 6. And that is why we say, when we're confused or something's in a maelstrom,
Yeah.
it's all at 6s and 7s. That's where that comes from.
The logical thing would have been to make them both 6 and the next one 8.
Yeah, but they didn't want to do that.
Here we are.
Maybe no one thought of that, though.
So at least every day is a school day.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So That's so the worshipful company of farmers
Yes.
is part of the freemen of the City of London.
Well, in order to, you have to be a member of
Yeah.
a livery company to
be
be a freeman. Yeah. So you get clothed in the sort of clothes of the livery, which is basically a big cape thing that they put round you, and there's a ceremony that goes along with that. And what they do is a lot of charitable work, basically education. So I've done various agricultural courses to do with leadership and things, and they paid for one of them for me to go on it, and they run various courses and give money away to farmers to go on these sort of courses, and they also run a couple of city farms. There's one, it's in one of the docklands in London.
So they get kids to.
Yeah, it's about educating people about
Yeah.
farming and food production. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we've got the ridiculous situation in this country where there's kids, probably, well, not in Oakham, but in some of the big cities, not too far away from here, that have got scurvy and rickets because they've got such a bad diet. Now, we're not living in the 17th century here. That is an absolute travesty that
Sure,
that
yeah.
is happening in this
Yeah.
day and age.
I know. I heard a stat the other day that something like 20% of children in UK are living in poverty, and 10% are in seriously bad poverty, where they're not going to get out.
Yep.
That's shocking
Yeah.
for a country that's what, 6th or 7th richest in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, how have we achieved that? It's madness, isn't it?
Yeah. And their diets will be appalling.
Yeah. So, Leicester Comedy Festival. How did you manage to get involved in that?
Yeah, I was. I used to be a trustee of the Leicester Comedy Festival. I saw an advert somewhere that they were looking for trustees, and I've always been interested in comedy, so I applied and got on the board. So I was one of the board of directors of the Leicester Comedy Festival. I did that for probably 6 or 8 years, I think.
Wow.
And they run a thing every year called the Stand-Up Challenge during the Comedy Festival. I mean, the Comedy Festival is about to start. It probably starts in the next week, I think, and it's the biggest comedy festival outside the Edinburgh Fringe.
Wow.
So it's a pretty big event. There's 3,000 or 4,000 events within the sort of 2.5 weeks, something like that. It's huge.
Blimey.
I mean, when I was the sheriff, I organised one here in the museum. We had a comedy night in the museum. But they have this thing called the Stand-Up Challenge for basically aspiring comedians who've never done stand-up comedy before, and you have to do 5 minutes of original material. So I thought, well, I'll have a go at that. And I actually won it. So I've done a few comedy gigs since the furthest I've been is Tasmania. To do I happened to be in Tasmania, but I did a comedy gig in Tasmania. So international award-winning stand-up comedian.
You know when you meet somebody for the first time,
Yeah.
and they say like, "So what do you do?" You'd have a really difficult time answering that question, wouldn't you?
Well, as to what I do.
Yeah.
Well, I do various different things.
Because the list is like, and massively differential as well.
I've tried to make my life as interesting and entertaining as possible by doing lots of different things that don't revolve around farming, and B, meeting different and interesting people like your good selves, who I would normally not come across during my normal day-to-day way of life. So that's how I try to live my life.
So tell us about your role on the council as chairman of the council. So what do you
So
do?
the chairman is different to the leader. So the chairman is the sort of titular head, front public-facing part of Rutland County Council. So bizarrely, I'm known as the first citizen of Rutland. But the leader is the political arm. So you could liken it to the difference between the king and the prime minister.
Okay.
Where I'm essentially the king, whereas the leader of the council is essentially the prime minister.
Sure.
So those things are sort of separate, because I'm the deputy leader of the opposition, but I'm still the chairman of the council.
Sure.
So I'm not part of the executive, so I don't essentially run the council. But I go to various events with my chain of office on and do the glad handing and promoting Rutland and things like that.
Sure.
Because that would be too onerous for the leader to do as well, because that is a full-time job, so you couldn't really do both roles. And I think historically they tried to, and then of course as it became more and more involved, with more and more to do, then it became impossible. So they separated it out.
So how do you get on with the leader? How is that
Fine.
relationship?
So do you have any kind of decision-making authority in that role?
So I can. It's difficult for me to say because I haven't got the Constitution in front of me. But I have to follow this. My job is to uphold the Constitution, basically, of the council, because each council has a Constitution, and it's my job is to run the council meetings as efficiently and fairly as I can, which is what I try to do.
So that's a bit like Speaker of the House now.
Exactly. That's exactly what it's like. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's me that dictates, or I sort of orchestrate the meeting essentially. So the choreography of the meeting is my job. So I've got to say when people can speak, when they can't speak, and make rulings onto whether they've crossed the line. Because you're only allowed to speak once on any debate item, unless you want to make a point of order or a point of information. So it's all that sort of thing that you've got to be on top of. And I have the ultimate control because I've got a mute button, so I can shut people up, which I had to do. I've only had to do it once, and I did it a couple of weeks ago at the flooding meeting we had, because 6 members called an emergency meeting of the council to discuss flooding. So that was the only item on the agenda. And we had something like 26 questions and deputations from members of the public. Ordinarily, for questions and deputations from the public, you're allowed 30 minutes, and that's it. Unless you vote to suspend standing orders, which is basically suspend the rules for that meeting. So that was proposed and seconded and went through, so that meant we had to listen to every single one. And there's strict rules about questioning. So if you wanted to come to a council meeting as a member of the public and ask a question, what you do is you write it in your question so that the person who's going to answer it knows what it is, because it's obviously quite difficult because basically we're all volunteers. So you read out your question. It is answered by the cabinet member or whoever is destined to answer it, and then you're allowed a supplementary question. What you're not allowed to do is make a big long statement. And what people tried to do during the flooding meeting was make big long statements. And one person in particular went on and on and on, and I said, look, that is not a question. Where is your question? And wouldn't ask a question, so I muted them and said, right, go back to your seat. Off you go. So it's about keeping order, basically.
Sure, yeah. Running on time, making sure people
Otherwise,
aren't
we'd have been there till now.
Yeah. Brill. If you asked 100 people in Rutland the role of the chairman of the council, how many people do you think would know?
2 now. As long as we were amongst the 100.
I think probably most people would confuse the difference or the roles of leader and chairman, because of course until I joined I didn't know either why there was a separate leader and why there's a separate chairman. But of course I do now because I'm within the role. But it is quite a difficult concept. But that analogy between the sort of king and the Prime Minister is one that sort of illustrates it quite well, I think.
Sure.
And as you say, being the Speaker of the House, where you've got to try and control everyone, and you can't say that.
Do you have to sign off on settled policy in the way that the King has to sign any Act of Parliament?
No. There are various things I have to do. If there's a civil emergency, then I have to chair the civil emergency meetings and that sort of thing. But I do have to meet members of if a member of the royal family comes, then I'm the first person that gets introduced to them and that sort of thing. So it's and I get invited to a lot of different events. That I was at the Leicester University graduation a couple of weeks ago.
So was I. My son graduated.
Oh really? What was it on the? It was Friday morning. I went.
No, mine was the Thursday afternoon.
Well, the reason I got invited was because someone from Rutland was getting a honorary degree. It was the Will Adderley, who's the I think it's Sir Will Adderley, who's the owner of Dunelm, who lives in Hambleton. So he got an honorary degree. So myself and the Lord Lieutenant went along.
I've probably paid for a couple of bricks of his house then, because we bought a lot of curtains over the years.
Oh, well, they've built up an amazing business because they started selling curtains on Leicester Market 40, 50 years ago, something like that. Maybe not even that long. And now they're a multi-billion-pound
Success story.
industry.
So, Andrew, if you could change one thing, what would it be?
Change one thing with respect to what?
What you're currently doing within the council.
Change one thing?
Yeah.
Oh, within the council?
Yeah.
The amount of money we get from the government. Because we've been cut back hugely. And bizarrely, we get much less money from the government than most counties and local authorities.
What, per capita?
Yeah, because we have to 76% of Rutland County Council's budget comes from the council tax. The average amount that comes from the council tax is 56% in the country. So we're 20% more. That's why our council tax is so high, because we get so much less from central. Because they think we're rich.
And what have they based that assumption on?
That's history. It's always been like that. That's why our council tax is so high. And people often say, well, why don't we join with Leicestershire or Lincolnshire? Theirs is much lower. I would suggest that would make no difference whatsoever, because you'd still have the same level of council tax, because we already share a lot of our services with Leicestershire, and various things are farmed out, like health and safety and things like that, to Lincolnshire and different authorities. So your council tax would not reduce, and you'd probably get 2 councillors on Leicestershire County Council, as we did when we were annexed by Leicestershire back in 1974. So you'd end up with probably worse services than you get now, with no say, or very little say. So that would undermine the democratic representation of the people of Rutland.
Wow.
So there must have been some kind of formula, I guess. Does this date back to 1990 when council tax first arose, or does it go back even before that?
I know the MP is trying to get it levelled up, because
Alicia Cairns.
Yeah, because she's quite cross about it as well. Because of course there's areas of poverty in Rutland, just the same as there is everywhere else. It's just that they're more hidden. And the sort of front-facing part of Rutland that everyone sees is one of reasonable affluence, but that hides the levels of poverty that there are. Just that they're not quite as in your face. Like if you go to Leicester, you'll see people sleeping on the streets. We don't see that here in Rutland, but there's probably people who've got no money and are homeless. So it's it's appalling, really, and the amount of money that's been given to local authorities has dropped something like 40-50% in real terms over the last 20 years. So what we're trying to do is do more and more with less and less. So it's really difficult. And we've got something like, I think we've got 3 or 4 high needs kids in the county, and we have to look after them, obviously, because they need looking after, costing $850,000 a year or something like that. And who knows, tomorrow a family could move into Rutland with 2 more high dependency needing kids, which could cost another £500,000. So it's very difficult to budget for things like that, because it's in statute that you have to look after people, quite right, but with no extra money. And we're starting to eat into our reserves a little bit, but we're a lot better off than most councils, because we've been prudent, and we've had some very good, what are called Section 151 officers, which is basically the accountant of the council that looks after the money, and they've been really good with their spending. But all the low-hanging fruit, where we can save money, excuse the cliche, has been taken. There's no easy options now. But we've got all these statutory responsibilities to look after the old people and the disabled and the sick and all that sort of stuff. And, we've got special needs kids, as I just mentioned. So there's no way around that. And the government isn't giving us enough money.
Final question.
Yep.
So where do you see yourself in 5-10 years' time? What's your
5-10 years time. 5 years time.
What's your long-term plan?
My long-term plan is to carry on doing as much as I can for the betterment of society. I mean, what we didn't talk about was my role as a magistrate.
Sure, yeah.
So I can do that till I'm 75. So that's 15 years down the line. So hopefully I'll still be doing that, and hopefully, as I say, because I like to do things that A, are interesting and entertaining, and B, are possibly for the general good. So if I can forward society a little bit, then all the better.
That's great. I think you're doing an amazing job. It's really, really interesting. Thank you very much for your time today. I know the listeners are going to love that.
Do you think?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for asking me.
So that's a wrap. And thank you for listening to our latest Pub Natter. If you visit timothyives.com/pub natter, you will find photos, links, and more information about each episode. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and please subscribe to ensure you don't miss a pub or one of our amazing guests. The Pub Natter theme tune is by Tom Arnold. That was a Pub Natter broadcast.